Am I on? Do I use this mic or? Whoa, it's bright up here. I'll tell all I know, I promise. No. Anyway, God bless you. Thank you. It's good to be here. Wow. I don't use notes. I have to wait for all of this to sort of come. Kyra asked me if I would just kind of tell the story a bit about how I began to awaken. I don't know. And so in order to do that, I kind of got to tell you that I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And by the grace and mercy of a God I used to hate, I've been sober since November 17th, 1999. That's 5,600. That's 5,688 days ago for those of you who are counting other than me. And because something began to happen on that day. And I'll get into more of that in a minute. But, you know, I heard something the other day that perhaps kind of just illustrated for me what this is about and this strange trip I've been on. A story about an alcoholic who was stumbling through the woods, totally drunk. And he comes upon this river, and a slow-moving river, and at the edge of the river is a preacher dressed in white, up to his waist in the water, and he's baptizing people. And so the drunk stumbles over there and gets in line, and it comes his time, and the preacher takes him and lowers him into the water and pulls him back up and says, "Have you found Jesus?" And the drunk says, "No." And so he does him again and brings him back up. And he says, "Have you found Jesus?" And the drunk says, "No." So this time the preacher holds him down for a while. It's like he's beginning to struggle. He brings him back up and says, "Have you found Jesus?" And the drunk says, "No." "Are you sure this is where he fell in?" and I love that joke because it has a deep mystical truth in it. If you're looking for Jesus out there, you're never going to find him. He's not out there. You know, is Jesus coming back? Probably not. So what? Christ never left. What difference does it make? The teaching is, we should just sit here for an hour and just carry on with the meditation we just started. I mean, when I finally begin to get that in my heart, life just became different. And I was coming to the end of a 9-year relapse. I had been wrestling with alcoholism for a good 2 decades. And I was in a 9-year relapse. I was a pillhead, an opiate addict. And I had reached a place of total despair. And by the late 1990s, I wanted to die, and I couldn't seem to kill myself. I had no reason to live. I was in my early 50s, and life had lost all meaning to me. And somehow on November 17th, 1999, I ran out of Morgan and I ran out of drugs on the same day. And I don't know why, but I didn't go out and get any more. And that opened up the doorway to a whole new level of suffering I had never experienced, because I had been using the drugs to deal with some terrible psychic pain. The drugs didn't work anymore. I was trying to drug myself to death. I finally just accepted the pain. I didn't realize that's what I was doing. And so I went through about 2 months of the worst suffering I've ever been through in my life. Absolutely indescribable. 10 days of opiate withdrawal. Some of you, I recognize, are in the program. You probably recognize what it means to be dope sick, as we call it. It was terrible. And then after that, I went through this period of emotional, I don't know, it was kind of like being put feet first through an emotional wood chipper. It was just horrible. It was, alternating black depression followed by absolute furniture-breaking rage. And it went back and forth, and this for about 6 weeks. And then in the early part of 2000, I started to feel a little better. I didn't know what was actually happening. I was kind of stunned to even still be alive. And I realized it was on my heart to go see my mom. I hadn't seen my mother in a number of years. She was living in Atlanta. So on February 1st, I drove over there to see her. Now, I came from a family that loved and wanted me. I was an only child, and they loved me and they wanted me, and somewhere around the time I hit teenage years, I just became a rebel without a clue. And I just went off into the wilderness for the next 4 or 5 decades. And when I I hadn't spent more than about 3 days in my parents' house. My dad was now dead by this time, and I hadn't spent more than 3 days with him and with my mother since I went off to college in 1964. And I went over there. I didn't really know why. I figured maybe 3 days would be about all I could stand of it. And I ended up staying 3 weeks. And during that period of time, my mother and I fell in love with each other. We fell back in love with each other. And I had this really goosebumpy experience. It gives me goosebumps to even tell this story again. My mother was dying. She was a drug addict. She was addicted to cigarettes. She was dying of emphysema, COPD. She'd been suffocating for a number of years because that's what smoking will do to you. And she couldn't stop and declared she didn't want to. And so I had reached a place of acceptance where, okay, she's going to do this to herself. She was in a very weakened condition. She wouldn't accept any kind of help. And I was able to accept that she was like that. But anyway, what would happen is she insisted on fixing me breakfast, and then I would do the dishes. And one day after I'd been there about 2 weeks, I'm doing the dishes. She's sitting at the table behind me smoking. And then she says something really odd to me. She said, "You know, Morgan, there's something different about you. I like you." Now, I'd always known she loved me, but she said, "I like you." And I still, So anyway, 3 weeks we spent there, and I began, after she told me that, I began to watch myself. And I realized that there was something new about me that I couldn't actually explain. I discovered that I liked people. I was interacting with people on a totally different level. And I mean, I'm talking about people, waitresses in restaurants, people in convenience stores, people I met on the street. It was amazing. In any event, so to finish the story, to complete something happened part of it, I went back home for a couple of weeks. Her friend called me and said, "I think your mother's fallen. You need to come back over here." So I raced back over to Atlanta, and she had fallen. She was rather delirious. We took her to the hospital, and she died about 4 days later. She was 80 years old. And so I got the experience of watching her in those last few days, and I'd already had this amazing reconciliation with her. So I experienced it at a different level, and I remember that seeing my mother in a diaper rocked my world, and in the hospital, and she was delirious. She didn't make a lot of sense there those last 48 hours. And so I went out on the streets, and I wandered around the streets in downtown Atlanta in a great turmoil, and this sort of angry voice in my head going, why now? Why is she dying now? I mean, I realize that something wonderful is happening to me, and she's dying. What can I do about this? And so I had this running in my head for a while. And then out of nowhere, I heard this little voice. You're going to think I'm crazy, but most people do. It said, "Forgive her. Let her go." And it stunned me so completely that I just stopped dead in the middle of the sidewalk. What an idea. And in that instant, I saw how vicious my grief was, how much I was playing the ego game of how dare you abandon me now that I'm getting better kind of thing, and then disguising it as some kind of compassion. And the truth was, it was utterly selfish. And in that moment, I had what blossomed into a universal forgiveness experience. I hadn't even gone to my father's funeral 4 years before, 5 years before, partially because I was so stoned I couldn't gotten over there anyway. But I despised the man. And I began to realize that I was able to forgive him too. And so on that day and in that place, standing in that sidewalk outside a hospital in Atlanta, Georgia, I just sort of set all the prisoners free. All debts are canceled. Everybody walks free today. And on that day, my past died. I introduced myself in meetings as I'm known as Morgan, a sober alcoholic. What I actually am is still being revealed. And that's the great spiritual journey. The eyes of my heart were opened on that day. And from that day forward, I have lived guided by love rather than driven by fear. And I have no idea where I'm going with all this, but somehow there is a powerful compassion in me that never seemed to be there before. And so I'm just kind of following that, where that leads. I came back to Houston, and I didn't know exactly what I was going to do, and I found my way back into the 12-step fellowship. And it's just been totally different. It's very difficult to explain, but what I found myself enjoying helping people. And I was never one to help people. I treated people like furniture. You know, I'd kick them out of the way if they were in my way. They were obstacles on my path to great success. I had a real envy problem early on in my teenage years, and I set out to make a lot of money. They would ask me sometimes when I was in grade school and high school, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I said, rich. Well, what do you want to do? And I said, I don't care. I just want to be rich. I want money. And for many years, money was my God. I thought money meant power, freedom, and security. So I went out and got myself a bunch of it. I remember my parents saying to me, money won't make you happy. We came from modest circumstances. I said, well, how would you know? None of you people ever had any money. You know, I'm going to go out and get some, and, I'll make my own decisions on this. And lo and behold, I discovered they were right. Money won't make you happy. Money will not alleviate fear. Matter of fact, money makes fear worse. Because the more money I had, the more afraid I was going to lose it. The more stuff I owned, the more concerned I was that somebody was going to steal it. I didn't realize all of this at the time it was happening. I remember this one time I went over to Atlanta, where my parents had lived for about 30 years, and I was a big shot. I thought I was a big shot. I had started a sales and marketing business, and I was speaking at I was doing motivational speaking, and I was speaking at a big conference in Atlanta. It was like 15,000 people, and I was up, and so I thought, well, I'll take my parents, I'll show them what I do. So I got this double-stretch Cadillac limousine. I drove up to their apartment, and and we put them all in. We put them in this limo, and we took them down to a 5-star restaurant. And I spent hundreds of dollars on them for dinner, and and I took them to the conference. They watched me do my magic act on the stage. I go back home, and my dad says to me after we get back to the house, I got the limo waiting outside. He says to me, "Are you happy?" And it infuriated me. The question just angered me. I couldn't believe it. I said, "You would ask me if I'm happy? There's a limousine parked out there. That's a solid gold Rolex watch. I had a $20 gold piece, and with a gold chain. I had wrist bracelets and all this. I looked like a cocaine dealer." Which, by the way, at the time I was dabbling in becoming. That's what I did with my nightlife. But anyway, so I'm just standing there, I'm just stunned. How could you ask me? I'm so obviously successful. And of course, he went right to the heart of the matter. Because what was happening to me at that point was I realized, I didn't want to admit it, but I was miserable. I had confronted and come face to face with the worst thing that can ever happen to the ego. There are two great tragedies that the ego deals with. And until we face both of these, there probably is no spiritual freedom. The first tragedy the ego faces is when I can't get what I want. Now, this generally hits us when we're about 2. You've seen a 2-year-old, right? And you give them a toy, you take it away from them, they smile. And suddenly, in about 2.1 years, you take the toy away from them, and they're very angry. They're enraged. That was mine. You took it away from me. And they start screaming, right? Terrible twos. So I had that experience early on. But the other experience, which is even more shattering, is I got everything I wanted. I could not think of anything else to want. We had several cars, had a couple houses, had all this money. We traveled, and I was miserable, and I didn't really want to admit it. Which, by the way, this is when since I'm going to tell a little bit of my alcoholic story, this is when my drinking and drugging really went stratospheric, because I couldn't face that reality. So that was in 1980. So it took me until 1999 to get sober and have this experience. So I had to go through a terrible period of suffering in order for this to happen. I've come to the conclusion that the ego cannot surrender. It's not in the nature of the ego to surrender. I'm sober by grace. I'm sober because the Spirit triumphed. God had his way with me in spite of me. And it took me going to a near-death place before I got so exhausted that the Spirit could break through. And so I really appreciate them singing my favorite song today. You guys did a great job with the music, and I love it. It was great. But I have to tell you, the original wording of that song, Saved by Grace, it says, saved a wretch like me. Now, in Unity, they say a soul like me, which I don't disagree with. But I was a wretched human being. I was at the end. I couldn't live and I couldn't die. And that's when this happened, whatever this was. And since that day, the phrase, my life, has ceased to mean anything. It's a silly phrase. It's the heartbeat of the ego. It's the madness of that there's somebody called me that owns my life and my stuff. And it's a lie. And it's not true. It's a delusion. And the fact that most of the people on the planet, most of the 7 billion people on the planet, share the same delusion at the same time makes it a little difficult to wake up from that bad dream. And this really is. It's an awakening from a bad dream. I sometimes think that I was fast asleep in heaven for 53 years dreaming I was in hell. And then I woke up. You know, Plato wrote about anamnesia, which is the loss of forgetfulness, if you think about it for a minute. It's the waking up from the dream. A dream is like a state of forgetfulness. I forgot who I am. And now I remember. Oh, I'm not an only human. I am spirit. That's all I ever was. Jesus talked about it all the time. He refused to take personal credit for any of the good that happened. He said, I of my own self do nothing. The Father within doeth the works. There's something inside of us that's doing this. So the story, the point to my joke was that we're all looking for something. There's old song from Urban Cowboy, that movie Urban Cowboy, John Travolta and Deborah Winger way back when, set here in Houston at Gillies. And the theme song was looking for love in all the wrong places. That's what the ego is doing. That's what the soul is doing. We're looking for love, and I looked in all the wrong places. I was looking for it in money. I was looking for it in prestige and people respecting me, or barring that, fearing me, hating me even, but telling me I was here. I was looking for it in power, in pleasure, looking for it in the bodies of a number of women, looking for it in drugs, looking for something that to complete me. And I never found it. I never found it because it's not out there. You're not going to find it out there. It's not out there. This is not about finding God. It's about releasing God. The Indian mystics in Hindu and Buddhism, they use an analogy of there is only spirit. I mean, that's what we were saying earlier. If you actually get that you don't have a life of your own, that you are in fact an expression of grace, that you are the Word made flesh, that's all you are and it's all you could be if you get that. But the problem is the ego blocks us, this false self, from seeing this. So their analogy or metaphor for it is, imagine a jar. Now, the surrounded by air on the outside, and inside the jar is air, and the jar is sealed. Now, the ego is the jar. If you smash the jar, that which was inside unites with that which was outside, and the reality becomes obvious, which is oneness, unity, all one. One is all there is. There's not two, only one. Before Abraham was, I am. After Morgan's dead, 10,000 years, I am. That's it. It's like, whoa, why don't they get it? And of course I have to ask myself, well, why don't I get it? And see, what comes when this breakthrough happens is, St. Paul was right, all that's left is faith, hope, and love, and the greatest of these is love. The eyes of my heart opened. I stopped trying to figure it out. I stopped trying to get God. I stopped trying to calculate or manipulate it, and just accepted it as being inside of me, trying to get out. And love fulfills itself by giving itself away. So the only way to find God is to go to work for him. The power of the universe is available to every human being. There's only one rub, one tiny little rub. I'm talking about the power of the Big Bang, the power that spins the galaxies, the power that raised up these bodies and animates all of the bodies and all the sentient beings and all the planets and all of the galaxies. That power is available. The only problem is it can't be used for selfish purposes. I can't use that power for my personal ends. Darn, what's behind door number 2, right? Okay? And so this endless seeking for something that we already are is the delusion. And so service is the way we open the door, shatter the jar, and let love out and let it flow. And so basically it's a matter of self-forgetting. It's about letting go of all of my little problems and calculations and manipulations and strategies and rehearsals and resentments and projections and of all how the terrible bad things that are about to happen, and the head goes crazy because the ego always defaults to fear, which is a sense of separation from God, which is delusional because it's not possible to be separated from God because God is all there is. And what begins to dawn in awareness is that I don't live in a two-power universe. It's not the good versus the evil. That's the heart of the ego's game. It's not good versus evil. There's only God. There's nothing for God to be a power over. Nothing stands against God. Only God is real. Only God is real. It's in the head that we get into this dualistic thinking of, oh, those are the good people, including me, of course. I'm always one of the good people. Those people over there are the bad people, the enemy. They don't understand. We have to go fix them, kill them, something, right? Because they're the problem. That kind of dualistic thinking destroys my ability to actually see what's actually going on. And so what happens is, when love replaces fear, then life is lived in a different way. And some of the analogies that I try to use is love is letting go of fear. To be afraid is to have more faith in evil than in God. So fear is this delusion. So fear does all kinds of terrible things to me. It blocks me from God and it blocks me from you. You know, the way I like to think about it is this, is that love builds bridges and fear builds walls, digs trenches. Okay? Love opens doors. Fear locks the doors. Love opens the hand in welcome, and fear closes the hand in a fist, picks up a sword, and goes to war. That's the war that's going on inside each of us. It's a war between my soul, which I really am. It's no such thing as my soul. Excuse me, I'm wrong terminology. The soul that I am and the ego I thought I was. That's the war. And so the name of the game is to move toward the light and away from the darkness. See, the good and evil thing is kind of like light and dark. Dark is not the enemy of light. Dark is the absence of light. Evil is not the enemy of the good. Evil is the absence of good. And when I begin to see it that way, it's possible to stop looking at things and in a dualistic way. And then the practice becomes a practice of giving, a practice of helping, a practice of serving. I mean, it is so easy once I learned how to practice it. And I don't have to save the starving people in Africa. I'm never going to be able to do it. I have to let that one go with God. The question is, can I be a benediction to the person who crosses my path today? That's all I got to do. Can I do that? Am I willing to do that? And what I first have to do is surrender my judgmentalism, my opinionator. Somebody in one of my favorite AA meetings likes to say I had to stop doing God's job and start doing God's work. And the work of God is to comfort and encourage the people that walk along the path. Because we're all God's kids, and the differences between people is the difference between the degree to which they realize their true spiritual nature and the degree to which they're still trapped in this terrible struggle with their ego. And so each person I look at is like an individual universe that's going through this struggle, this attempt to break out of the selfishness. And they've got all kinds of problems. They're full of fear. They're full of anger. They're hurting. If I can comfort and encourage them even for a moment, I've done some of God's work. I've become an agent through which God flows. See, and this becomes the practice. Common courtesy will get you a long way down the road. If I can just say please and thank you. If I can be kind and compassionate to total strangers for which there is no reward whatsoever. Random acts of kindness. You know, it's tough work being a waitress or a waiter. That's hard work. So treat them kindly. Well, they're paid. Besides, I'm going to tip them. They should get over here with my food, right? That's the ego. The awareness, wisdom says, yeah, but, you know, that's a tough job. They do it for 12 hours a day. They don't get paid much. And mostly people just complain to the waiters. How many people have ever actually told a waiter how much they appreciate him? I like the garbage man analogy. How many people actually go out and tell your garbage man, thank you for picking up this trash and taking it away? Smelly, nasty job that it is, because if you didn't take it away, it would still be here. No, the only time we ever talk to our garbage man is when he doesn't pick it up and we complain. So try to eliminate complaining. I try to be generous with my praise and stingy with my criticism, which involves, of course, a change of heart on the inside. The change has to be on the inside. I had to have this experience before I could pass it along. And that is the essence of the spiritual journey. And only through service can we actually align our will with God. Only through giving up my agenda of what I believe and what I want and beginning to try to be of service and use to the people around me, can I ever find any true happiness? Albert Schweitzer said to a bunch of people, I just got the quote, but I don't know where the venue was. He said, I do not know what any of your destiny is going to be, but I do know that only those among you who find a way to be of service are ever going to be happy. There's a guy named Tagore, Rabindranath Tagore. He was the first non-European to win a Nobel Literature Prize. He lived from 1861 to 1941. He was renowned all over India and the world as a writer, an artist, a poet, and a mystic. And he was a teacher. Some of his quotes are beautiful. And one that I really like goes like this. I slept and dreamt that life was joy. I awoke and saw that life is service. I took action, and behold, service is joy. So enjoy yourself. I love you.